Speech, there are moments, beloved, when your heart whispers what your ears cannot bear to hear, when love feels like a burden, not a gift, and though you prayed, though you hoped, though you gave more than your voice could express, something felt wrong. This message is not to bring bitterness, but clarity, not judgment, but freedom. For the Spirit of God is near to the broken-hearted, and he reveals truth, not to condemn you, but to lift you from the shadows. Let us walk through the quiet signs, not to blame, but to heal, because you, precious soul, were never meant to be used. You were meant to be cherished, and when the wrong hands held your heart, your Father saw it all. And so today, may you hear the Spirit whisper, I saw it, I was there, and I am the one who restores. 5 signs you were being used without mentioning him. Your worth was measured by what you gave, not who you are. If love only came when you sacrificed your time, your peace, your dreams, that wasn't love, that was survival in disguise. You felt drained after every conversation, not uplifted. Love doesn't leave you empty. When connection becomes consumption, you're not being held, you're being harvested. Your spirit felt silenced, even while you smiled. When your voice no longer mattered, when your heart became quiet to keep the peace, it was no longer partnership. It was quiet captivity. You were always the one fixing, apologizing, or trying harder. If you carried the weight of 2 souls alone, then it was never shared. You were serving a role, not building a life together. Peace left when they came and returned when they left. Let this be the final truth. If their presence brought confusion and their absence brought clarity, the Spirit is telling you, you were not loved, you were used. Key point 1. Your worth was measured by what you gave, not who you are. There is a sacred ache in the soul when your love becomes a transaction. You did not enter with a price tag on your heart. You gave freely your time, your care, your presence, not because you were desperate, but because that is who you are. You showed up with your hands open, not asking for anything in return, but simply longing to be seen, to be chosen, to be safe. And for a while, the giving felt beautiful, until it started to feel expected, until your presence was no longer honored, only used. Slowly, you may have noticed that your kindness was no longer received with gratitude, it was met with silence, or worse, with more demands. You started to feel like a resource instead of a person. Your gestures were no longer special, they were standard, and when you withheld them even for a moment to care for yourself, the shift came. The warmth turned cold, the conversation grew short, the affection dimmed, and without words it became clear, love was conditional. But hear me now, dear soul, love that must be earned with performance is not love at all. Love does not measure, love does not weigh. Real love sees the soul, not the service. If you had to prove your value over and over again, if your place in someone's life always hung in the balance of what you could do for them, then you were not loved, you were utilized. And oh, how that slowly chips away at the heart until you begin to question your own worth. And perhaps you began to overextend yourself, giving more, doing more, becoming less of yourself in hopes of being enough. You abandoned rest because you feared being forgotten. You ignored your own needs because you were trained to feel selfish for having them. You confused loyalty with losing yourself and called it love. But that's not the heart of God. That's not his design. That's not how he teaches us to love or to be loved. You were never meant to live under the weight of proving you're enough. That's not your portion. That's not your inheritance, and the ache you feel, that exhaustion, that quiet resentment you buried so deep, it's not a sign you're broken. It's a sign you were never meant to stay in a place where your giving became your identity. You are more than what you offer, you are who God made you to be, and your worth is not up for negotiation. Key point 2. Interactions left you emotionally and spiritually depleted. There's a weariness that no sleep can cure, the kind that comes when your spirit is drained, not just your body. You smiled, you laughed, You stayed present. But when the conversation ended, when the door closed, or the call dropped, there was always a silence louder than words, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that echoes with emptiness. What should have refreshed you left you numb, and you knew it deep down, you knew it. You were pouring from a cup that was never being refilled. You started bracing yourself before each encounter. Your heart would whisper a quiet prayer, "Lord, help me through this," before the phone rang or their footsteps came near. That's not love, that's survival, and your spirit felt it, because real connection doesn't leave you drained, it revives you. But instead, you were always the one giving encouragement, giving patience, giving softness, while what you received in return was tension, criticism, or apathy. You were slowly being emptied in the name of relationship. And yet you stayed, not because you didn't see the toll, but because you loved so deeply. You hoped, you prayed, you thought maybe if you loved harder, it would change. But the more you gave, the less you had. You stopped singing to yourself, you stopped dreaming out loud, you stopped resting in God's presence the way you used to, because your emotional energy was spent surviving an exchange that never honored you in return. Spiritual depletion isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like silence in prayer. Sometimes it feels like heaviness in your chest for no reason. Sometimes it's the tears that come at night when no one is watching, not because of what happened, but because of what keeps happening. You begin to wonder, when did I become the only source of strength in something that's supposed to be mutual? The Holy Spirit grieves when your soul is not at rest, and oh, how he notices when your joy fades day by day. This was never the will of God. Love is not meant to leave your soul empty and your heart confused. Love, when it is real and God-breathed, restores, it lifts, it brings clarity, it makes you more whole, not more hollow. So, if every interaction cost you a piece of yourself, if every moment together felt like a quiet withdrawal from your peace, then it's time to ask the question your soul already knows the answer to. Was I being loved? Or was I being drained? Key point 3. You silenced your truth to keep the connection alive. There is a deep cost in pretending to be fine when your soul is not. At first, you told yourself it was love to hold your tongue, to shrink your emotions, to let things slide. You didn't want to be too much. You didn't want to start another argument, so you buried your voice beneath the surface, hoping silence would keep the peace. But what you were really doing was losing pieces of yourself, one unsaid truth at a time. God gave you a voice, not for noise, but for clarity. Yet somewhere in that relationship, you began editing your heart. You rehearsed how to say things gently, cautiously, quietly, and sometimes didn't say them at all. Not because you lacked the courage, but because you knew deep down, truth had a price. Speaking up meant tension, voicing hurt meant being misunderstood, and being honest meant risking distance or worse, being dismissed entirely. So you kept it all inside and called it grace. But there is nothing holy about silencing yourself for the sake of staying connected to someone who never made room for your truth. You were not asking for too much. You were asking to be heard, and when that request was treated like a burden, you learned to shrink. Your tears dried before they reached your cheeks. Your opinions echoed only in your mind. You nodded when your heart was shaking. And slowly, a holy part of you went quiet, not because you stopped caring, but because you started protecting what little peace you had left. The Spirit of God never requires you to hide who you are in order to be accepted. He is the Spirit of truth, and he does not dwell in deception, even if it's self-inflicted. The ache you felt in your chest after each silenced moment wasn't drama, it was discernment. Something in you knew, I am not being seen here, I am not safe to be honest, I am loved, only when I stay small. And the God who knit you together in truth wept with you each time you swallowed your voice just to keep the connection from falling apart. But beloved, connection that costs your authenticity is not connection, it is quiet captivity. The love of Christ never forces you to suppress who you are. And when you have to choose between your voice and your value in someone's eyes, it is not love you're trying to protect, it is your survival. And the Spirit will always nudge you toward truth, even when it breaks your own heart. Because He knows you were not made to live in hiding. Key point 4, the emotional labor was one-sided. Love, when it is true, is a shared journey. It is two hearts carrying burdens together, two souls listening, lifting, and standing in the gap for one another. But somewhere along the way, you became the only one showing up with open hands, the only one checking in, the only one holding space when things went wrong. You became the steady one, not because you never struggled, but because no one ever asked how you were doing. And so, silently, you began carrying the weight of two people on shoulders that were already tired. You noticed how you were always the first to apologize, even when you weren't the one who caused the hurt. You became the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the fixer. You made excuses for their silence. You explained away their behavior. You tried harder, stretched thinner, stayed longer. Not because you didn't know your value, but because you had hoped that if you just held on long enough, loved deeply enough, things would balance out. But they didn't. The scales stayed tilted, and your heart bore the cost. The quiet reality is, you were managing both your emotions and theirs. You were the one softening every hard moment, bringing calm to every storm. You were expected to understand, to endure, to pour. But when your soul needed a hand, it was met with distance. When your heart broke in secret, there was no one waiting to gather the pieces. And the hardest part, you convinced yourself that this was what love looked like: selfless, sacrificial, enduring. But what you were really practicing was abandonment of self in the name of survival. Emotional labor isn't always visible to others, but your spirit felt every ounce of it. You felt it in the way you guessed your needs. You felt it when you cried alone and wiped your tears quickly so you wouldn't be called dramatic. You felt it in the exhaustion of being strong for someone who never thought to be strong for you. And while you told yourself, it's just a season, that season stretched into a cycle, and that cycle quietly wore down your joy. Beloved, the Spirit of God never asks you to bear a yoke alone. His design for love is mutual, not a silent martyrdom where you give endlessly and receive only when convenient. And if you found yourself always pouring and never receiving, always giving grace and never receiving comfort, always explaining and never being understood, it wasn't love, it was labor, and you were never called to carry that kind of weight by yourself. Key point 5, peace was more present in their absence than their presence. One of the clearest ways the Holy Spirit speaks is through peace, not the kind the world gives, but the deep, unwavering stillness that settles into your soul when something is right. And sometimes peace doesn't come when someone arrives. It comes when they leave. You didn't want to admit it at first. You told yourself it was loneliness. You told yourself you missed them. But as the days passed, something else emerged, a quiet, gentle calm. The anxiety faded, the confusion lifted, and in the stillness you realized peace had returned. There were days you felt emotionally tossed around, uncertain and unanchored. You questioned your thoughts. You wrestled with your instincts. You walked on eggshells, unsure what mood you'd face, unsure what words were safe. That is not the atmosphere of love. That is the residue of manipulation or disconnection. And you never felt more alone than when you were right beside them. Yet in their absence your spirit started breathing again. Your clarity came back. Your sleep returned. Your prayers felt alive again. You began to notice it in the little things, how your home felt lighter, how your laughter returned without force, how your mind grew quiet at night instead of racing. That wasn't just relief. That was discernment. The Spirit of God had been whispering to you for some time, but it was only in their absence that you could finally hear it. The absence didn't hurt as much as the presence once did. And in that realization, you saw the truth. Peace had been trying to lead you out long before they ever walked away. Sometimes the people who bring the most chaos are the ones we try hardest to keep because we confuse intensity with intimacy. But God never trades peace for passion. He is not the author of confusion nor the source of fear. And when someone's presence continually disturbs the atmosphere of your soul, you must ask, is this God's best for me? Because the fruit of His presence, even in relationships, is always peace. And anything that consistently robs that peace is not a gift, but a warning. You did not imagine the calm that came when they were gone. That was God. That was the Spirit wrapping His arms around you and saying, now let me speak. Sometimes peace isn't what remains, it's what returns. And if their presence constantly clouded your mind, exhausted your heart, and silenced your spirit, then their absence was never the problem. It was the beginning of your healing, ending of the speech. You may have walked through this quietly. Maybe no one knew. Maybe you didn't even fully know yourself, but heaven did. The Spirit of God saw every silent tear, every forced smile, every time you questioned your worth in the presence of someone who never saw it clearly. And now He brings you not just truth but freedom. You were not foolish for loving. You were faithful. You were not weak for staying. You were hopeful. And even now you are not broken, you are becoming. Because what tried to empty you, God will use to restore you. What was meant to diminish your light will become the very place He reignites your fire. Don't mourn what you lost more than you rejoice in what you're gaining. Peace, clarity, wholeness, and a love that does not demand your silence or your suffering. The Spirit has been gently guiding you not to harden your heart, but to protect it. And now He says, daughter, rise. I never created you to be used. I created you to be loved. Let the healing begin not with anger, but with truth. Not with revenge, but with release. Because when God closes the door to being used, He opens the door to being seen, fully, freely, and forever. And oh, what a beautiful door it is.